Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So nice to see everyone, and I am so delighted to have we had the opportunity to. It makes such a big difference to be here together after just so many Zooms. So we are delighted to welcome you to the Fairfield Library, and thank you very much to the Fairfield Library for hosting us. And we have two fantastic speakers, and well, obviously Melanie and Jane that is going to lead the conversation. But I just want to talk about how interesting it is to be part of IWF, and really the International Women's Forum and the Forum of Connecticut really is delighted to have such a wonderful audience. As you know, we are trying to strive for a great content program for the year. This is our third event for the year, and we just have to acknowledge Leslie and the programming committee for the fantastic content that they are developing. And just to welcome also also, we have a great audience here in person. For those that are in Zoom and you cannot see all of the participants, but we have a great audience and we're having a lot of fun. We are also welcoming you from a Zoom perspective, and we would love to have you in person, but we are delighted that you joined by Zoom. And I think that part of being part of IWF is this sisterhood and this creating long-term friendships. So the more that we can participate in events, it's what makes a difference. And I hope that everybody continues doing that. We are going to have our dine-arounds coming soon. I hope that we can be able to see more of you. And with that, I would just want to give the introduction to Leslie Grossman, who is going to take it from here. He's going to formally introduce the speakers and, well, continue the conversation. So thank you very much for this afternoon.
Thank you, Lucy Claire. Lucy is, by the way, our co-president. If you haven't had a chance to meet her, please do at the end of this because she's fantastic. I want to also acknowledge Marie Melixian, who is not unable to be here tonight, but they are the great leaders of this organization. So I just want to welcome you as well and say a few words about the program you're about to see. I want to thank Kay Ellen, who is going to officially introduce our speaker, because Kay Ellen is the chair. She keeps throwing it back to me, but she is the chair of this program, and without her we wouldn't have this extraordinary speaker, Melanie Kirkpatrick, with us today. And she's going to tell you more about Melanie. But since this is Women's History Month, we've made it a tradition to always honor women from the past, because we know when we're inspired by the past, we can then encourage the women of the future. And we are women of the future, and we have the next generations that we want to bring up to be those really amazing women that they have the potential to be. So with that, I want to just acknowledge one other person, and that is our interviewer, because after we hear Melanie present this amazing program about her most recent book, because this is just her most recent book, she's written several books, we will have a journalist who is now a filmmaker and a co-author of a book called Remarkable Women. And that is also a book of history. And that is Jane Applegate, who you will meet. And Jane is going to be interviewing Melanie. She was also herself a reporter, a very long-standing reporter and journalist for the LA Times. So she knows how to ask the questions. But she, with her co-author, Alice Look, have created another book. So we have two books tonight that we are acknowledging for women of this Remarkable Women, and of course, Lady Editor, who you're going to be hearing all about. So thank you all for coming, and now I'm going to turn it over to Kay Ellen to introduce her friend, her dear friend, Melanie Kirkpatrick.
Thank you very much. Now, I have a tendency to whisper, so if I'm not talking loud enough, let me know. I'm very pleased to be here tonight at this great program, to see everyone in person. I'm fairly new myself to the Connecticut Forum, though I've been a long-term member of IWF. And the thing that I've loved about it is that remarkable women that I've met tonight. And then when I've lived in different places, like in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and then in London, England, I was part of the forums there. And so that's been really very exciting. So I'm very glad to be here with you tonight and to introduce Melanie, who she and her husband are long-term friends of mine. Now, Melanie is, of course, I think, a remarkable woman. She was from Buffalo, New York, and the first class of women admitted to and graduating from Princeton, which was quite a tribute, I think. And from there, she actually went back to Buffalo for a while, but then was selected by, I think it was the Princeton Asia Foundation for an internship program. They were offering their graduates internships in Asia, and that's how she got to Tokyo, where she then worked for Time Life Books. And then for about 3.5 years. And then she was recruited by the Wall Street Journal Asia to work for them as an editor in Hong Kong, staff writer and editor in Hong Kong, where she was for about 3.5, 4 years. 6 years. 6 years. And then I met her when she came back to New York and became a deputy editor at the journal here. One of the things that too is interesting, that sometimes I think remarkable women have remarkable mothers as well as fathers. Her mother was in the Navy and during World War II. And coming back to IWF, like Lucy was talking about, one of the women in IWF in Washington, D.C., in fact, who nominated me, was a big raised money and helped build the women's I think it's called the War Memorial, where Melanie's mother is actually listed. And so that was a good connection back to IWF. And as was mentioned, Melanie has, after she left the journal, after a 30-year career, which she interviewed many heads of state, like worldwide, and U.S. leaders like worldwide, like Margaret Thatcher and the Bushes and Bill Clinton, who she said was quite charismatic. And she's also, she wrote a book about escape from North Korea. She's an expert in North Korea, about those who escaped and what their journeys were like. Just a copy of the book to look at, as well as one of their first adult books about the history of Thanksgiving, No Dancing Turkeys. And it was there which she discovered Sarah, and who was convinced she will tell you all about that. And that's what she'll be talking about this evening. And really, that's what I want to say. She's really terrific, and I think this is going to be very interesting. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kay Ellen, for that beautiful introduction. And I want to give a special thanks to Leslie and Kay Ellen for organizing this event. And sorry, just a minute, please. There we go. And also to the Fairfield Library, this beautiful library. And thank you so much, Claudia, for being the tech genius behind this event. I really appreciate your introduction, Kay Ellen. I've known Kay Ellen since, I don't know, about 30 years. And for 30 years, I have been hearing about IWF. And so it's finally nice to actually experience your wonderful organization, and I'm grateful to be here. I also want to thank Jane Applegate, whom I'll be speaking to later, and put in a plug for Jane and Alice Look's book, Remarkable Women. There's a copy of it up there you can take a look at, but it's absolutely a wonderful read. And I urge you to read about some remarkable women you probably haven't heard of, which is a great segue into Sarah Josepha Hale. If you've heard of her, it's probably as the author of Mary Had a Little Lamb, or the editor of Godey's Ladies Book, or as the godmother of Thanksgiving. And she was all that, but she also was much more than that. Godey's Ladies Book was, Godey's Ladies Book was the Godey's Ladies Book was the best read magazine of the pre-Civil War era, and Mrs. Hale was a household name. When she died in 1879 at the age of 90, after editing Godey's Ladies Book for 50 years, her passing was widely noted in the press. A Boston newspaper lauded her as an earnest worker in the cause of woman's advancement. The Philadelphia Inquirer wrote that she, quote, did much to dignify women's work. Harper's Bazaar, a competitor of Godey's Ladies Book, eulogized her as the pioneer woman editor. 2 years before her death, the President of the United States, Rutherford B. Hayes, wrote Hale a letter addressed in his own hand, praising her as, quote, a lady who has accomplished so much for the peace and happiness of the American people. Sarah Josepha Buell was born in 1788 on a farm in Newport, New Hampshire. Her parents were originally from Connecticut, where their ancestors were among the earliest settlers of the colony. Her father was a veteran of the Revolutionary War, and her mother, who homeschooled Sarah and her siblings, believed that her daughters should be as well educated as her sons. In the late 18th and early 19th century, no college admitted women. You know, I think I'm one slide behind. Sorry, there we go. In the late 18th and early 19th century, no college admitted women. So when Hale's brother Horatio went off to Dartmouth, Sarah couldn't go with him. Such was the value that the Buell family put on education, however, and such was the force of Hale's intellectual curiosity that Horatio set out to teach her everything he had learned at Dartmouth. And I like to think that she received the benefit of a Dartmouth education 175 years before the university admitted women. In any case, she was one of the best educated women of her generation. Her education continued when she married a lawyer, David Hale. Every evening after supper, Sarah and David would sit together for 2 hours at the dining room table. And they would study the classics. They would examine the prose style of the great English writers, and they studied French, botany, mineralogy, geology, and more. When David contracted pneumonia and died suddenly in 1822, Sarah was left nearly penniless, with 4 young children and a 5th on the way. She was determined to find a way to support her family and educate her children in a way that she and David had dreamed. Needlework was one of the few options open to respectable women who had fallen on hard times. And so the Freemasons of Newport, of which David was a member, set her up in a millinery shop. She hated it. Before David's death, Hale had published a few poems in local publications, and now she set out to try to make some money as a writer. The Freemasons paid for the publication of her first book, a collection of poetry. Several magazines in Boston published her work, but her big breakthrough came with her anti-slavery Northwood published in 1827. Northwood was a literary success. The novel caught the attention of a man in Boston who was starting up a serious magazine for women. He wrote to Hale out of the blue, offering her the position as founding editor. And so, a few months shy of her 40th birthday, in January 1828, Hale became the editor of the Ladies magazine, embarking on an editorial career that would last for half a century. Under Hale's editorship, the Ladies magazine became the first successful magazine for women. It was so successful that Louis Godey, owner of a Philadelphia-based magazine called The Ladies Book, tried to lure her to Philadelphia to edit his publication. When she refused his offer, Godey did what any good businessman would do. He purchased the Ladies magazine so that he could retain Hale as editor. Thus was born a great partnership that created one of the first national magazines in the United States. That's the short history of how Hale got into journalism. And I would like to focus the rest of my remarks about what she accomplished with her work. The range of her interests and accomplishments was enormous. She wrote about and offered opinions about of just about every topic of special interest to women. Just who was Sarah Hale? Let me offer 5 answers to that question. She was a journalist, an author, and an editor. According to the Yale Bibliography of American Literature, Hale wrote, edited, or contributed to an astonishing 129 books. That's in addition to the millions of words she wrote for her magazines. She was incredibly versatile and wrote in many genres: reportage and opinion journalism, poetry, short stories, novels, children's literature, cookbooks, advice books, religious books, and plays. And I put copies of a few of her books in the on the table over to my left in the back. Since this is Women's History Month, I want particularly to mention her book, Woman's Record, a 900-page compendium of the biographies of 2,500 women since the beginning of recorded history. It holds the distinction of being the first volume of history to put women at the center of its research. As such, it is a distinguished forerunner of a school of academic discipline, women's studies, that didn't emerge until the middle of the 20th century. There's a copy of it on the table, but please be careful not to drop it on your toes. It's very heavy. Over the course of her career, she campaigned in the pages of Ladies Godey's book for the entry of women into many kinds of occupations that were usually closed to them. The 2 professions to which she devoted the most attention were teaching and medicine. She greatly admired Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman to receive a medical degree. She also wrote about women who were postmistresses, accountants, printers, waiters, bank directors, and government clerks, and many others. She highlighted the work of accomplished women of her day, such as the educator Emma Willard, and the astronomer Maria Mitchell, who discovered a comet that was named after her. In her old age, she campaigned for women to play larger roles in Protestant churches as medical missionaries and as deaconesses, non-ordained women who worked as teachers and social workers. She also campaigned vigorously for economic freedom for married women, who under the common law of the day were required, this is amazing, were required to let their husbands act for them in all financial affairs. A married woman's earnings and inheritances, for example, belonged to her husband, nor could she own property or sign contracts. As an aside, I'll note that widows operated under no such restrictions. And it occurs to me as I was writing the book That this may be a reason that Hale, who was a widow for 67 years, never remarried. She enjoyed her financial independence. The second aspect of Hale I'll mention is that she was a patriot. She brought a deeply patriotic sentiment to her magazines. She believed that while the 13 former British colonies had been united politically by the Revolution, they hadn't been united culturally. And she set out to help America develop its own cultural identity through using her magazine, through her choice of what to publish. In the first issue of her first magazine, that's 1828, she announced that she would publish content by American authors writing on American themes. From the perspective of our century, this may seem an obvious goal. Surely Americans want to read about their country and their countrymen and women. But it was a radical idea in an era when an American identity was just being formulated. It was also a radical idea in the publishing industry, where many periodicals were cut and paste jobs, compiled by so-called scissors editors who clipped articles from British or other publications and republished them without credit in their own publications. Hale, in contrast, sought original homegrown material. The bylines that appeared in her magazines represented the best of America's emerging literary talent, such as Edgar Allan Poe and Nathaniel Hawthorne, John Greenleaf Whittier, and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. She also sought out women, talented women to write for her, and many female authors got their start in her magazines, or built or enhanced their reputations there. Among them were the young Harriet Beecher Stowe, the popular poet Lydia Sigourney, who was known as the sweet singer of Hartford, and is an ancestor actually of Sigourney Weaver, and Frances Hodgson Burnett, who was the author of The Secret Garden. Hale's All-America formula for her magazines helped shape a common American aesthetic, creating a mass culture not just in literature, but in food, art, music, etiquette, and fashion. In every corner of the expanding nation, the readers of Godey's Ladies Book were learning what it meant to eat like an American, dress like an American, behave like an American. They were quoting the same poetry, cooking the same recipes, and sewing the same fashions. Hale was an educator. Before her marriage, Hale spent several years as a teacher at a school that she had opened for young children in Newport, New Hampshire. The school still stands, though it is now a private residence. When Hale began her editorial work in 1828, only half of American women could read. And as I mentioned earlier, there wasn't a single institution of higher education that admitted women. She often said that education for women was the paramount mission of her magazines. For 50 years, every issue, literally every issue of the Ladies Magazine and Godey's Ladies Book reported on and advocated for women's education. One of her early editorial campaigns was on behalf of women as teachers. This bucked the prevailing view of the day, which was that women lacked the intelligence to be successful teachers, except of very young children. Hale believed that the two sexes had equal intellectual capabilities, but lacked equal educational opportunities. That a properly educated woman could teach any subject as well as an educated man. Quote, "There is no branch of learning taught in our common schools which females would not be capable of teaching." Her advocacy helped change the national conversation about women's roles overall, but especially about their suitability for the classroom. By the 1840s, women were entering the teaching profession in large numbers. Having run a successful school before her marriage, not to mention her experience as the mother of 5, Hale developed strong ideas about how to teach. She believed that children learn best when they developed at their own pace, and that self-instruction, guided by a teacher, was the most effective way to absorb knowledge. Good teachers helped pupils learn how to learn. She believed, too, that children learned best when they were entertained, that is, with music or lively stories that held their attention. Hale wrote about this in her magazines, and she put those beliefs into action in her own writing for children. Her juvenile poetry and short stories were a departure from the moral didacticism that characterized most writing for children until the early 19th century. Rather, they were child-centered and provided an engaging blend of entertainment and moral instruction. They almost always carried a message, but they also engaged the imagination. The now forgotten third verse of Mary Had a Little Lamb exhorts children to be kind to animals. This was right at the beginning of the animal rights movement. Hale's writing on behalf of female teachers was just one of the many areas she pursued on the subject of women and education. She started in Boston, what is sometimes called the first kindergarten in the US. She founded the first daycare center for working women, also in Boston. Another aspect of Hale was that she was a style setter. And there is no better example of her sway as the preeminent cultural influencer of her day than 2 traditions she introduced to her readers in the 1840s that continue to flourish today. If you wore white at your wedding, or if you put up a Christmas tree in December, you can thank Mrs. Hale. Both reflected her respect for Queen Victoria, whom she held up as a moral exemplar for American women. The Christmas tree caught on in America after Hale published an engraving from a London newspaper of Victoria and her family gathered around a Christmas tree at Windsor Castle. She Americanized the engraving by removing Prince Albert's mustache. She hated whiskers and making the Queen's tiara disappear. Her changes, we call them a 19th century version of photoshopping, transformed the picture into a cheerful domestic scene of an anonymous American family gathered together to celebrate the holiday. The white wedding gown was inspired by Victoria's wedding dress for her 1840 marriage. Women tended to wear more colorful wedding dresses before Victoria started a fashion for white gowns. Hale made an exception to her usual avoidance of writing about fashion and described Victoria's white satin gown in admiring detail. The Lady's Book went on to publish many items about and drawings of women dressed in bridal white. And here's an example of 2 of them. Let me add a word about fashion here. Godey's Lady's Book is justly famous for its fashion plates. And as I speak, I will click through several slides of the famous colorful and black and white fashion engravings in Lady's Book. Readers admired these fashion plates so much that they would tear them out of the magazine, frame them, and display them on the walls of their homes. These plates are still readily available on eBay and other auction sites. The Lady's Book employed women in Philadelphia to hand color, the fashion plates using watercolors. They were part of the WFH movement, work from home movement. Despite the popularity of the fashion plates, Hale, in a word, hated fashion, which she thought encouraged avarice and vanity and was a waste of time and money. Just as she wanted to cultivate an American literary culture, she wanted to encourage an American style of dress. Couple more of these. She wrote, she asked her readers, "Are we always to be indebted to Paris and London for our mode of dress? Shall we never be fashionably independent Republicans in costume as well as character?" For Hale, neatness and simplicity were the hallmarks of the appropriate American style of dress. Comfort and freedom of movement were also important. She raged against heels that were too high, dresses that were too flimsy for winter weather, and corsets that were laced too tightly. She lamented the craze for unnaturally small waists. In her old age, in her personal life, Hale did have a concession to fashion, and that was her hairstyle. And you can see from this picture in her in her old age that she parted her long hair, but she parted in the middle and then she pinned it up in the back. And on two sides, she wore pipe curls, also known as rag curls. They first became popular in the early 19th century, and Hale was faithful to them for the rest of her life, apparently indifferent to the fact that the style had gone out of fashion long since. But there is a romantic explanation for this. Her husband, David, loved them, and so she continued to wear them. Then the final point I want to make about Hale is that she is probably the most famous one. She was the godmother of our Thanksgiving holiday. She's the unseen presence at our Thanksgiving tables on the fourth Thursday of November. Without her, there wouldn't be a national holiday to celebrate. Hale adored Thanksgiving. Her 1827 novel Northwood contains the best description in American literature of what we call a classic New England celebration. Quote, "Pies of every name and description known in Yankee land, with the pumpkin pie, quote, occupying the most distinguished niche." Before 1863, when President Lincoln heeded Hale's call and named a National Thanksgiving Day, the date of the holiday was left up to the governors, who didn't coordinate. The holiday took place anytime between September and December. It was a state-by-state decision. There was an amusing saying that if you planned your travel itinerary carefully enough, you could enjoy a Thanksgiving dinner every week between Election Day and Christmas Day. Hale saw Thanksgiving in part as a patriotic holiday, along with the 4th of July and Washington's birthday, two national holidays that were born of the American experience, and the only national holidays in America at the time. Christmas didn't become a national holiday until the 1870s. She also saw Thanksgiving, with its emphasis on family reunions and a special meal, as falling into the feminine sphere. The holiday reflected, too, what she saw as the generous spirit of the American people. As the country moved towards civil war, she hoped that a national celebration would help to preserve the Union. She wrote, "Such social rejoicings tend to greatly expand the generous feelings of our nature and strengthen the bond of union that finds us brothers and sisters in that true sympathy of American patriotism." There were two aspects to her campaign for a National Thanksgiving Day. First, she used the pages of Godey's Ladies Book to create public support for her idea. Second, she carried out a private letter writing campaign, lobbying presidents, governors, congressmen, and other influential Americans across the country. It's a measure of of her fame and the stature she occupied in American society that many of her correspondents, including several presidents of the United States, wrote back to her. After Lincoln's death, she didn't claim victory and halt her campaign. She successfully urged Presidents Johnson, Grant, and Hayes to follow Lincoln's example. And by the time of her death in 1879, the tradition of a national Thanksgiving was well established. Though you may find it interesting to know that the holiday did not become official, that is, it did not become law until 1941. Writer, patriot, educator, style setter, and godmother of Thanksgiving. Hale was all these things. If you'd asked her, however, what was her most important role in life, I believe her answer would have been something different. I think she would have responded, I am a mother. For all the work that she did to open doors for women, she believed that motherhood was a woman's highest calling. And she argued that women who worked in the home deserved a higher status than society accorded them. We've heard that before, since then, I should say. As an editor, she had an enormous impact on changing Americans' views on the importance of educating women. In 1828, her first year as editor, she wrote, "Perhaps no experiment will have an influence more important on the character and happiness of our society than the granting to females the advantages of a systematic and thorough education." Without the work of educated women, it's hard to imagine how American women would have won other rights. Some of Hale's beliefs, such as her anti-suffrage views, show her to be, as we all are, a person of her time. Today, these views are rightly seen as archaic. Another important women's issues, however, education, paid work, property rights, she was a radical, a woman ahead of her time. She was advocating for these issues, by the way, 20 years before the Seneca Falls Convention on Women's Rights took place in 1848. In addition, her ideas about women's special obligations to family, their moral leadership, and about how they could live useful lives remain relevant today. They are worth considering and learning from in a modern setting to which men and women are accepted as equals. Sarah Josepha Hale was, in my view, the most influential woman of the 19th century. She used her magazines to change the national conversation about women's roles, responsibilities, and power. I learned about her through the book I wrote on the history of Thanksgiving, and I wrote the book for the purpose of illuminating the extent of her influence, which hasn't been sufficiently appreciated. Thank you all.
We're sharing a mic, so I'm going on this side.
Right.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, new friend.
All right.
This is great. What a wonderful crowd. Nothing makes us happier than a room full of remarkable women. So you're all busy and working and have a lot of responsibilities. So we appreciate your time tonight. So what's really, there's a lot of cross connections. When Leslie introduced us to Melanie's book, I said, why isn't this woman on the list of about 300 women that we are starting to research for our little world of the Remarkable Women Project? So, of course, now Mrs. Hale is on that list because she deserves to be there. And also, when I got a copy of the book to read prior to this meeting, it was such a good read.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, really, I urge all of you to grab a copy. And get it signed, because then you have to keep it. You can't sell it. You have to keep that. Yeah, it's not, or wait until we depart, then you can put it on eBay. But just the purpose of the work that we're doing in these books and these projects is to continue to shine a light and unveil these stories Because when you see this, I think, why didn't I learn about her in school? And I think
Yes.
that's something that comes up a lot through the women that we're starting to research. And our little project is looking into the history of women around the world whose stories need to be told. And that's the mission of our little nonprofit. And Alice has spent the past year working on blogs. And this week, Melanie is our guest blogger. So if you go to Remarkable Women's Stories, you can read a condensed version of this presentation. And it's terrific. It's really a great overview of why we care about this woman and why she's remarkable. So you actually answered the first question I had, and I'm going to just ask a few and then moderate and open it up for the rest of the program. So you found out about her through the Thanksgiving research, and what prompted you to even write a book on Thanksgiving?
Oh, Thanksgiving it grew out of September 11th. I was downtown and on that day and saw the towers fall. And I decided, like a lot of Americans, as a result of that horrible experience, that I just wanted to know a little more about what it meant to be an American. So I decided to read of Pilgrim's Plantation, which is a book that kids used to be required to read, or at least read parts of. It's the book by William Bradford and his journal of the Pilgrim's trip to Plymouth and the establishment and growth of Plymouth and all of that. And so when November came around, I fast forwarded and I got to the section on Thanksgiving, what we call the first Thanksgiving. And it's only 101 words. And it doesn't even have the word Thanksgiving in it. But to me, it summed up what we still celebrate on Thanksgiving. And so I decided I wanted to know more about the history of the holiday, and followed up with a whole range of interesting material that I hadn't known existed, like that Thanksgiving wasn't a national holiday until 1941, or that Sarah Josepha Hale was responsible for making it a national holiday. And I also look at the competitors for the title of first Thanksgiving in America, which of course belongs to the Native Americans. Ronald Reagan, I should add, was the first to mention the Native Americans in his Thanksgiving proclamation. So that's how I found her. And back then, when I was, this is a few years before I wrote the book on Thanksgiving, but the research had to be done at the New York Public Library. I hired a researcher who is my stepdaughter and herself a librarian, herself. So she would go, and she had to go use microfiche in order to find references to Thanksgiving in Godey's Ladies book. And she got a stack of clips about this high. When it came time to write the book, there was more online, so I could do that. But as a lady editor myself, I really became interested in Sarah Hale. And the more I learned about her, the more I just was blown away by what she, as an editor, was how she was able to shape public opinion. She also, there's a chapter in the book about her philanthropy. She was like the first woman to work in big philanthropies as opposed to soup kitchens or something. But that is, it was very different from my first book on North Korea. And people often ask me, so I say sad, then happy.
You're showing your versatility.
Yeah, I guess.
I think the thing that really struck me is she was a young widow with 4 children and one on the way. And I love that you shared was it the Masons?
Yes.
They offered her, you can work as a seamstress, because that's the one thing kind of a thread through American culture. We've covered a lot of seamstresses, and she said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so, I
But
thought,
then they stepped forward and published her
Yeah,
first book.
yes,
Yeah.
so they did help her that way.
Yeah.
But if you can imagine, I mean, even just having a few children and trying to work, so she had 5, she's on a farm, she's newly widowed, and she just had this passion and this drive
Yeah.
to do something.
She actually had moved into town by then, but she still had to do, back then you had a cow in the backyard and stuff. But everybody wanted her to separate her family, and because she couldn't afford to take care of them and send the kids out around to different people. And she refused to do that. And when she accepted the job in Boston, she had to go alone, well, only with the youngest. She took the baby with her, and the other children, the 2 boys went one place and the 2 girls went another, but then they were eventually reunited in Boston.
I think the other thing that was fascinating is she really was against women having the right to vote, even though it seems very strange that she advocated, financial power and being able to have a career and do all these other things. But why did, because this is all coming up again with the suppression of voting and women's rights.
Yeah.
Why was she against suffrage?
It's a very interesting argument that she had. Remember, you can't look at it from the point of view of the 21st century. But she argued that women were of a higher moral order than men. And
Which is true.
That they would have more impact on politics, advising the men in their family. And she thought politics was a really dirty business. Again. And she wanted women to stay out of it and, just as I say, have influence. Toward the end of her life, that, maybe it began to change. She did advocate for women to be elected to school boards. And I think, as we know, those elections helped to move forward the women's suffrage movement. And in this being against women voting, she also was in the majority. The large majority of American women in the middle of the century did not think women should have the right to vote. So.
The other thing, and then I get your questions ready. I got such a kick out of her being sort of an anti-fashionista, but she knew that those plates, those beautiful drawings, were highly attractive and influential.
Yeah.
So if you get a chance to look at the examples of this lady's book, I mean, it covers everything, right? It has recipes, essays.
She was the first editor to publish a recipe section,
Yeah.
for example.
Think about that.
Yeah.
When you look at a magazine of today.
Mhm.
But and then your reference to her curls was very and like an homage to her departed husband.
Yes.
He liked that look, and she stuck with it for what, 87 years? One look, she don't have to follow fashion. It's got those rag curls going. So, anyway. So what questions do you all have? I'm just like getting the going. Yes, yes.
I would love to hear
Let me
about you.
She said,
No.
Yeah,
what about
career?
Tell us about your fantastic, you're a remarkable woman.
No, well, thank you. All of you here in this room are remarkable women, I've learned. Well, Kaylin gave a brief synopsis, but I loved journalism and was at the Wall Street Journal for 30 years. I've never taken a journalism course. I basically don't believe in it. I think if possible, I'm sorry, I know you teach documentary film, but
I have a
that's
journalism
different.
degree, but didn't.
Okay, all right. But I expressed that a little more emphatically than I should have. But I think the best way to learn is on the job. And a journalism degree is an expensive way to get that. first job. But oh, I started working on the overnight desk in Hong Kong as a copy editor. And why was it overnight? Because I had to work New York hours, which were 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. in Hong Kong. And I was the only woman on the desk. And we'd go out for beer after at 7 in the morning, which you could do in Hong Kong. And then I worked as the OpEd editor then in Hong Kong, and eventually came to New York in 1987. And I will mention one very impactful event in my journalism career. I faced criminal charges by the government of Singapore twice for editorials I wrote on the rule of law in Singapore. And they were not complimentary editorials, needless to say. And one of them just reported what an international body of attorneys had a report that they had published. So that was traumatic, and but I was grateful for the support of the newspaper, which was very, very supportive. And I didn't go off to jail in Singapore, which was, but it was interesting. It was criminal charges too, which was, you know, and the charge was, what was it? No, it's something like that though. Insulting Singapore or something like that. That wasn't right. Yeah. Yeah, something like that. Singapore is a wonderful place economically, but politically it's not so good. And the hardest decision I've ever made professionally was to retire from the journal because I loved my job so much. But I really wanted to write books, and my husband is older than I am, and I wanted to be able to spend time with him. My mother was sick, and I wanted to be able to help spend more time with her. So it all came together and has turned out beautifully, much as I miss the journal and the writing and the impact we had there. I've loved my new life too. And I actually think this is something very American. You know, to evolve. And I mean, you didn't start out as a documentary filmmaker.
It's wonderful, we can do it.
And we have the kind of society, both economically and social, the culture that allows us to do that. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yes.
Speaking of evolving, your first book you mentioned was about North Korea. I'm wondering, what's the experience of publishing this book been like in comparison with that one? Have you felt like there's been any kind of a different reception, you know, given how vastly different the subject matter is? There's
a lot of interest in North Korea, and the North Korea book has sold many more copies than Lady Editor has. I'm still hoping the Lady Editor is going to catch up, but it's also a topic that's in the news. I don't have to stop and explain who Lady Editor is before I tell you more. So I had, and it's still in print. I still get phone calls from reporters about it, and so it's that's really the big difference. It's also in writing it. Escape from North Korea is a piece of journalism. I interviewed many North Koreans who had escaped. I interviewed their rescuers, and I interviewed government officials in the US and South Korea, in countries where they would originally escape to. And so whereas Thanksgiving and Lady Editor are more works of research. I did do some reporting. For example, there's a chapter in Thanksgiving about Native Americans today, about their attitude toward the holiday, and I interviewed a number of Native American leaders, for example.
Oh, well, that was sort of gonna be my follow-up
Yeah,
question. How long did you spend researching this book?
lady editor, well, I researched it during COVID. So it was a great project. We were just sharing experiences about that. It was a marvelous a time to be doing a lot of library work. Hale's correspondence is very widely scattered. And so I would use the Ask a Librarian feature of most libraries and write and ask them if they had any correspondence for her. And people were so great. One in California, the Huntington Library, I wrote and said, look, I've read that the Huntington Library bought a lot of her correspondence. And he said, no, we don't have anything. And I said, well, I've read this, maybe. And he said, okay, I'll check. We have the old card file in the basement. And he found 17 letters, including from I think Millard Fillmore and another president. So that it was very important to my research. At Harvard's Widener Library, the undergraduate library, I wrote and to the librarian asking for letters. They had a couple. And this is, again, I don't think he had a whole lot to do, because not only did he send me photos of them, he transcribed them for me. Wow. So it was a wonderful time to do research.
Speaking as a librarian, we love those questions.
Oh,
We love them, and everybody wants a piece of it.
really?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the letters, because a lot of the material we're researching about the women we're looking at for our TV show is based on letters.
Mm-hmm.
We're working, for instance, with a professor in England who just went to Princeton, your alma mater, right?
Mm-hmm.
And spent 4 months in the library reading the letters of Sylvia Beach, the woman who helped publish Ulysses. And I said, 4 months reading letters? And she said, it's an enormous gift.
Yes.
She was so excited. And so, yes, an homage to librarians, because as writers, we spend a lot of time at the library.
Yeah.
Yes, Leslie.
I'd just like to ask you, Melanie, when I listen to what you've done in your life, starting from being in Asia, having your first job in Asia, and staying up all night to be the copy editor in a country, that was not your home country, and you were the only woman. And then to be writing about North Korea, and then having editorials that were threatened by lawsuits, took a lot of courage. Where did that courage come from within you to do all those things? No, really, I mean,
And so I sort of had never really thought about it. I always had a lot of support from Dow Jones, which owns the Wall Street Journal, and that was good. But my mother, Kayla mentioned my mother, who was in the Navy during World War II, and she had a big impact on me and confidence building. Both of my parents were, I have 2 sisters, I'm the oldest, and we grew up knowing we could do anything we wanted to do. My Ginny doll was an ambassador when I was playing. That sort of thing. So yeah, I think it was my family life that really is at the heart of all of that.
Great. Yes. Couple more questions, and then you have to have time to get a book that she'll sign for you. Yes, you. No, what in front? Okay, you first, and then.
Okay, as someone who has researched a lady editor and as a lady editor yourself, what knowledge have you gained and advice would you give to young women like me who are interested in journalism and
Well,
Zoom probably couldn't hear that, so maybe just clarify.
Yeah, sorry, advice to young journalists who, you know, I guess I would say the most important thing, and you should jump in here too, Jane, the most important thing is to be curious. And another important thing is to be accurate. And if you're going to go into print journalism, read. And if you're going into other media, I know another thing is that's very different from when I was a journalist. You have to be fluent in every media. You know, when I was started in journalism, you were a newspaper reporter, or you were a TV reporter or editor or producer. You kind of, or radio, right?
Siloed.
Yeah, that's right. So you really have to be able to not only write, you have to be able to speak about your topic and go on TV and be both coherent and look okay. So, want to add to that?
I would say, it's funny what you said about journalism school. I hated journalism school. I had horrible professors that measured our articles with rulers, and I finally went to the dean and said, you have to waive me out of these classes. I don't want to write about chemistry labs blowing up. So I got permission to actually work for the local, like, independent underground paper. So I just got off campus as fast as I could.
Okay.
Did manage to get a degree, but on the edge.
Yeah.
But I think being curious is really important, and I think the number one thing is being a really good listener. A lot of people think, it's
Yeah.
the Mike Wallace, pepper people with questions. I had really good mentors who said, just stop talking. Have your notebook out, ask a question, and just stop talking. And people will just open up, because everybody wants to tell their story. And I've had a tremendous career as a journalist just listening. And also, I think for a younger person, I had to get like horn rim glasses and wear a blue suit with a big white bow tie. And I would act a little stupid. And these executives I would interview would say, she probably doesn't understand anything we're saying, not a problem. And then the next day in the LA Times, they would be like, what? I just wrote down what you said, sir.
Well,
Naivety goes along.
I agree. I would ask basic questions, because you want to get somebody on the record. You can't just assume what their basis is. So.
And we have time for one more question.
I just, what I want to applaud among so many things is you were the first in many scenarios. And often when you're the first, you're the only. They usually go in, very close. And being able to slightly experience being the first and the only in some other circles. My question to you is, how, maybe now or in the recent past, what strategies did you use to make room for others to come alongside? All of us mentor somebody.
Yeah.
We are. What strategies do you use to make room for others, either now or that you've strategically used in the past?
Yeah, when I was at the Journal, I was the Journal. Dow Jones had and I believe still has, an organization that provides internships for young journalists all around the country in the summer. And I was a director of that and helped there. And then I was in charge of our internship program as well, in the editorial page department. And boy, that was great. I still keep up with many of the young journalists there. I get a lot of queries, and I always try to answer them, but I don't have an overarching approach or theory. It's kind of haphazard, but it is definitely always on my mind.
Thank you.
And I think one thing that's kind of popular more on the film and television side is the shadowing. I mean, if you just bring someone along, on a research trip or to sit through an interview or be on your set, I mean, it's you can find the right people and they're just, really eager to learn and more like a sponge. They're not really
Mm,
doing anything. Their job is to just be quiet and take notes and, assist. But I think that those programs are really important. I mean, some of the women we're working with who are one of our writers is in her 50s and she applied to shadow a Hollywood showrunner. And her friends in Ireland were like, this is crazy. You've written books, you've done had these accomplishments. And she said, I want to see how the sausage is made. I want to direct someday. I want to produce. And she got into a program and she said it was humbling and wonderful. And now she's got this experience and she could decide, do you want to do that? Or maybe you don't want to do that. And also I think for all of us, my biggest thought now is learn what, when you say no, it's as important as saying yes. So I think that's something for the decisions we make in our day, in our careers and in our families, just, it's okay to say no. And it's okay, to stand up for the no and also to say yes when you can. But this is great. Thank you so much. And please, we'll stick around and Melanie will sign some books and we're happy to visit before they lock us out of the library.